So Jos, we wanted to talk about the servant leadership approach. It's something that we've spoken about before, but I think to understand it, we need to look at the traditional approach to leadership so that we've got that as a comparison.
Yes, and I would say there are probably a whole slew of variations between a traditional leadership style and an inverted pyramid or the servant leadership style that I'm propagating, right? But when you think about the most traditional of leadership styles, it's a steep hierarchy, it's a steep pyramid, and it's essentially a leadership style that propagates that the wisdom is in the hands and the minds of a happy few who are happen to be executives of the business. And of course, it's a fundamentally flawed approach to leadership because it assumes that a few people are best placed to make any and every decision in the business. It's also flawed because it's a top-down approach to leadership. It doesn't allow people who are closer to the topic on hand and closer to understanding the resolution of the topic on hand to get involved in decision making. It's fundamentally flawed because it's non-inclusive by nature. It's almost militaristic, if you want, in its setup. I would describe it simply as old-fashioned. Now, many businesses still operate that way, but it is, in my view, and not that I know everything, but it's in my view very much a suboptimal way of running an organization.
And what are the negatives of the traditional management approach, leadership approach from your perspective?
Ultimately, and this I think is very important, I've always been stunned by the paradox that many companies engage in. They spend a tremendous amount of energy and time trying to recruit very talented people, and then they submerge those people, if you want, into a corporate environment in which those people are not allowed to share their opinion because creativity and openness and open-mindedness are not embraced as core behaviors in that organization. And so you've brought on board, and you've spent a lot of money to bring on board talented people who will feel disenfranchised very early on in that new organization because they're simply not being listened to, and they probably were promised a totally different environment before they joined the organization. And what it does is it ultimately pushes those high potentials outside of the organization. They have no incentive to stay inside that organization. At the same point in time, I think, every business, and those businesses definitely will have a PMP program that will be pretty rigid, and it will focus on in their minds, at least poor performers. And so it will push the poor performers out. And so in these types of organizations, I think ultimately you're on a quest for mediocrity because the high potentials leave because you don't create a stimulating environment for them. Those who don't live up to the obligations of an autocratic leader, right? Whether they're good, yes or no, is a different question, are asked to leave the organization. And what you're left with is the yaysayers are those who lead with yes without ever leading with why. And that's ultimately is a flawed situation which will lead to suboptimal decision making. Has to.
So Jos, I've heard you talk about the servant leadership model as a sort of inverted pyramid. Could you expand on that and explain how that works in practical terms?
Well, in one simple sentence, it says the organization does not work for the leadership. The leadership works for the organization. The CEO works for the organization, is an enabler of the organization's success, and is an enabler of the success of the individuals inside that organization. That's the first aspect of servant leadership. The second aspect of servant leadership is when you look at the inverted pyramid, is that customers are central to everything the organization does or should be doing, right? So the most important asset of an organization are its customers. And the second most important of the organization are its colleagues. And I also have a different theory, which is everybody in an organization is a salesperson for the organization. And hence I can say that the second most important asset of an organization is a customer-facing associate, because everybody is a customer-facing associate or a colleague in the business. And so the way this works is you have customers on the top of the inverted pyramid, then you have all the colleagues right below that, then you have the executive team, and all the way at the bottom of the pyramid, purely as an enabler, somebody who should understand that he or she wouldn't even have a job if it weren't for everybody else who is essentially busting his or her chops for the organization, would be completely irrelevant, wouldn't have a job. And so the task for that person, that CEO, is to make sure that the key stakeholders understand and are positioned in such a fashion that allow him or her to be an enabler of the success of the people and the organization as a whole.
And so then how does a servant leadership model lead to a more customer-centric, agile business?
Decisions should be made by those who are the closest to the challenge, the problem, the opportunity, because those people know the context of that particular situation. Most certainly, nobody could propagate that a few number of people in the organization know everything about everything that's going on in the business, right? And that's just simply a flawed philosophy. And so decision making needs to be, I was going to say pushed down. In this situation, I'm going to say pushed up to the highest possible level in the organization. And we should allow the people who are closest to the problem, closest to the challenge, closest to the opportunity to make the decision that's right for the organization. Of course, we have to measure whether that decision ultimately is the right decision for the organization. We also have to acknowledge that it's okay to make a mistake. Probably not okay to make twice the same mistake, but it's okay to make a mistake. And that is what empowerment means. Empowerment, of course, doesn't go without accountability, which is a set of checks and balances to make sure that the right decision is made at the right point in time.
Jos, thank you very much for sharing your views.
Thank you.